actual show. Brent Zwerneman, again, Houston Chronicle, covers Texas A&M and much more. And, I reached out to you a few weeks back, and, of course, you started all this mess. You and your report about A&M, or about Texas and the SEC, you began Realignment hell. Do you go to sleep at night? Can you sleep well?
I sleep like a baby based on that. No, it's hey, you got to. Speaking of just chaos, I set my alarm to make sure I was ready to roll, and the alarm goes off as soon as you start talking on my phone. My wife and daughter just walked in the front door, so I'm headed out to the car. I'm going to sit out in the car, but yeah, it's been nuts, and really, that all stemmed, and we talked about this last time or a couple of years ago. That all stemmed from Arbo and Lofton. He's the one that started it back in 2011. July 21st, 2011, he said the Big 12 is in a state of uncertainty. And I know that's not a real popular voice to know, but that's a pretty good Lofton right there. Mm-hmm. And so I sat down, and I think it's still like my number one all-time tweet or right up there of Bo and Lofton saying the Big 12 was in a state of uncertainty. So 10 years later, in the dog days of summer, I'm looking for an anniversary story. And that whole thing stemmed from that anniversary story of talking to some old contacts, and they're like, hey, and while you're at it, you need to check into Texas and Oklahoma, wanting to go to the SEC. Really? And then I happened to be at SEC Media Days, and y'all know the rest.
Right. Wow, that's interesting. Well, that's great that you were working on something else that led to it, no question about it.
So, Brent, from what you've seen that's happened now in the aftermath of USC and UCLA, the Pac-12 now crumbling, you got to see this because you've covered A&M a long time. You covered them when they left the Big 12 and the Big 12 almost fell apart the first time. You got to see the Big 12 almost fall apart again and then revive itself. And then the Pac-12 look at that and learn zero things from it. What's your kind of take on how everything is shaken out this summer?
It's crazy. I was actually down in Houston yesterday and got to visit with Bill Hancock because they were doing something at Milby High School, and to signify how much the college football playoff helps out area teachers, and whatever the host town happens to be. And he was just talking, and I kind of felt the same way. Just kind of sad, really. You kind of grew up on the Pac-12 or Pac-8, whatever, back in the day and so forth, and the way it's just unraveled so quickly, and you're like, are they really thinking all this through? But from the A&M perspective, of course, and we've talked to Jimbo Fisher about this, they feel like, based on a decade ago and all the uncertainty, they feel like, man, they're fortunate to be in this position of a comfort level when everything around them just seems to be chaos, and to be in the SEC like that. And of course, personally, man, I've been so happy that the Big 12, I'm a fifth generation Texan and grew up watching the Southwest Conference, and the fact that the Big 12 conference has not just survived but thrived has been really cool from that perspective. But in terms of the Pac, it's like, it's not just problems from the past few weeks, it's problems from the past few years or past decade or so that has led to this. And I do think at some point, as Bill Hancock was saying, bottom line is people are still going to love college football, and there's still going to be that playoff that people look forward to in its very, very basic part is going to be that college football is still going to be there, and people are going to look forward to the playoff. But there is a little bit of sadness around it as well.
Brent, how has A&M, opened up their arms to Texas and Oklahoma, so to speak, or at least the fans? I mean, I'm sure it was at least a shock, but here we are a couple years later, one more year to go before it's all back to normal with A&M playing Oklahoma, playing Texas in particular. Have folks kind of all along been on board? Has it taken some time to come along? How would you just sort of describe A&M fans' reactions to all of this madness and how it directly impacts them?
A couple of years ago, all the people, the Aggies, who were saying, "Oh, they don't want the game back," and so forth, and why would they want to play the Longhorns? And I'm sitting there thinking, those are the same guys who will be first in line for the E-line for tickets because they are passionate about it. And finally, when they realized it was inevitable, and that was my first thought when I heard that news, a couple of years ago. Hey, the game's coming back. This is going to be awesome. Again, a game you grew up on Thanksgiving and so forth. So, Wes Bjork, the athletic director at A&M, had told me early on, well, College Station is going to host the first game, even though they hosted the last one as well as part of this whole deal. And based on all that, I think that kind of helped with the excitement, the idea that A&M will be hosting Texas next year, and with the idea that, hey, they're not turning back. It's going to happen. I think Aggie fans have now embraced the idea that the rivalry is back. And I think they embraced it all along, even if they publicly didn't say so. I mean, people are so passionate about it. And to say that they don't want the game means that they, in my mind, want the game.
Yeah, I'm just glad we don't have to ask about whether will they ever play again, because it was sad that they weren't, and yet I understand the perspective of both. Now, with Jimbo Fisher coming off what was a disaster last year because of all the expectations, and it seems like maybe I'm wrong, but from your perspective, you're there. Is it kind of nice for them right now? They're kind of flying under the radar?
Yeah, they squeezed into the AP top 25 at 23. And the way Jimbo, I asked him about it last week, and he said, hey, win games and that'll take care of itself. And that's exactly true. The past 2 years, they've started number 6 in the nation and finished unranked both years. And last year was, only a couple of games into the season, you had a home loss to Appalachian State, lost 6 straight games for the first time in 50 years. So you're going back to the Emory Ballard era, in the early 70s there. So some things that they're really trying to put behind them. But on the flip side, I think 5 of those 7 games were losses by an average of like 4 points. So if you add a touchdown, which they're really hoping new offensive coordinator Bobby Petrino can do, you add a touchdown, suddenly you're 10-2. So I think they're holding on to that. And to your point, kind of liking the idea that they feel like they're going to surprise some people. And, a bunch of talent back. I mean, across the board, you lost a couple of really good defensive backs to the NFL, but past that, of course, Devon A-Chain, the running back to the NFL as well, but they should be stocked there with Reuben Owens, a new 5-star running back on campus. So I picked, it's funny. I had them at 8-4 over the summer, just kind of going down, looking at the schedule and saying 8-4. And then when we get to visit with the coordinators once a year, which is silly, but that's the way it is here. So we sat down with Bobby Petrino, and he was great. And it wasn't just he's saying what people want to hear. He was very insightful about his plans for the offense and taking it over from Jimbo Fisher. And based on that, I've never done this, guys, in 25 years of doing this. I actually added a win to my predicted schedule to go 9-3 based on an interview, based on the idea of how much Bobby Petrino seemed to grasp the situation that he had walked into. And I don't know that he's ever had this much talent to work with either. So I got him at 9-3 in the regular season right now.
Well, Brent, you know this. A&M is at their best when everybody thinks that they're going to be terrible. So
yeah, and Jimbo feels like he's got a lot to prove too. It's been now 10 years since he won the national title at Florida State. He had the top 4 finish, which is hard to believe with all the resources that Texas A&M has, that they hadn't been in contention for a national title since 1939 when they won one. But their number 4 finish in 2020 was their highest since winning the national title. But then on the flip side, that was the COVID year. So they played 10 games, finished 9-1, finished just outside the college football playoff at number 5. So the idea is he has a lot to prove in what should be a normal regular season, because the offense was decent that year, but you also had crowds at 25% or 50% as well. And the offense was a going back to, I think y'all's word there, disaster last year. So that's where Petrino, he was essentially, Jimbo was forced to take in an offensive coordinator, but he has now seemed to kind of be at that level of acceptance and saying, okay, this is the way it's going to be, and he can maybe turn his attention to other details of the program that really needed it.
Brent, going back to the summer of 2021, what was that like to be the one? It's not like you haven't reported or been first or broken stories before, because you've been in this business a long time and you're where you are because of it. But what was that like? Did your phone just start blowing up? Did people want to tell you were wrong? What was that like?
I still say the most unique story I've ever, because obviously that would have come out very soon, at some point along the way. The most unique story I've ever broken was the Dennis Franchione secret newsletter story, the VIP connection. Yeah. And, essentially that was a mad booster. They had signed all these, non-disclosure agreement, whatever. But, essentially that was a mad booster who was tired of Franchione and hit forward on his computer to send that to me, but that's still the most unique, because maybe to this day that wouldn't have come out. But on that day, I swear it was so funny, because the initial reaction was just going, the way you described it, disbelief. I remember it was at SEC Media Day, so we're in Birmingham, and Paul Feinbaum asked me to come on his show immediately, and so I'm getting up there, and this guy that was walking off, and I think it was Roman Harper, he goes, and he had no idea who I was, and he's coming off the set, and he goes, "Man, I don't believe that story at all." I go, "Yeah, me neither." And he just kind of nodded like, yeah, who's the fool who wrote that, and so I get up on, and I relayed that story to Paul. I said, he doesn't believe it. And Paul's like, well, I'm still having trouble, and everything. So, but bottom line, I mean, and the timing of it, that's what was so funny. Being at SEC Media Days, it was about that 10-year anniversary story. It wasn't about me, trying to place calls to Greg Sankey from College Station, Texas, and saying, hey, we need to talk about this. It was a matter of me, when I got word of that, going down and finding him on Radio Row and me saying, hey, we got to talk. And, my mom growing up always said God has a sense of humor, because immediately I was faced with, on shows, obviously A&M had this orchestrated event. Ross Bjork, the Texas A&M athletic director, didn't even know about it. And he was there. So suddenly, so it was nuts. But I knew, it's one of those things I've probably missed on quite a few stories over the years, because I'm so cautious in my reporting, because I know one bad turn on that sense can be your career. I had rock solid sourcing on it, and multiple. And Greg Sankey, when he said, when I asked him about it, he said, well, he started mouthing, who told you that? And I just kind of looked at him and he said, well, rumors are swirling. Well, the reaction we got from UT right at that same time was the quote, rumors are swirling. So they had obviously talked before. Well, if anybody asks, just say rumors are swirling. So the quotes matched up. There were so many stories from that day, but it was nuts. And and with A&M taking the podium when the story had just broken, and that was another story, because I couldn't get Wi-Fi in the hotel. People are saying, "Oh, they timed it towards A&M walking to the stage at the podium with Jimbo Fisher going up to the stage." No, I had been trying to get it posted, couldn't get Wi-Fi. I finally hit send on the story outside the Winfrey Hotel, because I could finally get on my hotspot on my phone and send it. So all those things were just so funny, in terms of that story. But yet the immediate reaction was, well, an orchestrated event by Texas A&M to get this word out at SEC Media Days. And it wasn't that at all. It was me looking for a story in the dog days of summer.
That's awesome.
You just popped a bunch of conspiracy theorists,
hearts.
Yeah, terribly there.
Yeah, no, that's just the way it went, man. And it's one of those things where I'm always careful to say, when you start saying it wasn't this person, it wasn't that kid, you start narrowing down. But that's the way it played out. And I go back to what my mom said. God has a sense of humor. That was quite a day.
Brent, I want to go back to the Coach Fran story real quick. Is that the silliest reason a coach has ever been fired?
They were looking for something.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting, because what are we at now, 16 years later? Mm-hmm. The one that kind of broke the back for Fran was a not just a loss at Miami, but a terrible loss. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Aggies went in there and got pounded by Miami, and a first-year coach, I think it was Randy Shannon at that point. And Fran, and whatever it was, his fifth or sixth year, at that point, he comes and he meets with us afterward, and he's very dejected, and he says, well, the exhibition season is over. Well, so you can imagine Aggies really took kindly to that, because they had already, essentially were out of the national championship race before it ever started early in the season. And to call it the exhibition season was something. And so then that story came about, but they were looking, and even the athletic director at that time, Bill Burns, they were all looking for a reason to get rid of Dennis Franchione. And I think, if I'm recalling, and now these numbers seem so small, which is crazy, but I think based on all of that, his buyout was reduced from $8.8 million to $4.4 million. They cut it in half, and then he exited, and they had Mike Sherman lined up, because there were some people in power at that point that were enamored with Mike Sherman. But yes, they were looking for something, and I'm telling you, if obviously A&M was in contention, or in among the top 5 programs in the nation, first of all, that VIP connection, secret newsletter, would not have come to light. And second of all, had it come to light, they would have said, oh, Dennis, come on now, get rid of that. Okay. All right. Let's move on to Baylor next week or so forth. So yeah, but they were looking for a reason to run him off at that point, and the secret newsletter provided that.
Brent, thank you very much. Great going down the memory lane of what happened 2 years ago, and also what has happened since, and how that really went about with the story, because there are some discrepancies, or not discrepancies. There are people with like their own conspiracy theories and all that, and you just kind of laid it out on the line for us to know, and we appreciate it. Great stuff when you do it. Anytime you do it, we appreciate your time.
Absolutely. I appreciate y'all having me on. That was fun.
Yeah, us too. Brent Zwerneman, Houston Chronicle. And